Well, I'd like to welcome you to this conference on Ukrainian democracy. My name is Frank Fukuyama. I'm the Mosbacher Director of the Center on Democracy, Development, and the Rule of Law, which is part of the Freeman Spogli Institute for International Studies. The larger institute is directed by Mike McFall, who is going to be chairing one of the panels later today. Our center is devoted to the study and also the promotion of democracy around the world. We have been very involved with Ukraine over the last several years. We run a number of leadership programs. One of them is the Draper Hill Summer Fellows Program, where we invite about 25 civil society, government, business people from around the world who are interested in promoting democracy. We've had, over the years, quite a few Ukrainians come through this program, like Mustafa Nayem, like Andrei Shevchenko, the ambassador to Canada, and others. The second one is one that I started back at Johns Hopkins, the Leadership Academy for Development, where we teach a leadership training course. We've been doing this in conjunction with the Center for International Private Enterprise. I myself am going to be going to Kiev in about 10 days to teach another one of these programs, and we've cycled quite a few young leaders through those programs. But then last but not least is the Ukrainian Emerging Leaders Program. We are now coming to the end of our second year. This is a program in which we invite 3 up-and-coming young leaders from Ukraine to spend the academic year with us here at Stanford. And it's those 3, Natalia, Sasha, and Ivan, that have organized this program and gotten so many of their Ukrainian fellows here to Stanford to participate. Now, this is part of a larger strategy. We did not pick Ukraine by accident. There are a lot of other countries where we worry about the state of democracy and governance around the world. And I've been asked on numerous occasions, why Ukraine? Why don't you do it for, Uganda or Brazil or some other country that needs stronger institutions? And I actually think that there is a good reason why we've picked Ukraine. I think that right now there is a global contest that has been redefined. It's no longer the Cold War contest between ideologies. It's really a contest between what I would describe as a kind of modern, clean, democratic form of governance, and one that is highly kleptocratic, shrouded in non-transparency, based on essentially the private interests of the people that rule the country. And I think the home of that type of governance is actually Russia. And I think that Ukraine is on the front line of this battle. I think that what happens in Ukraine is extremely important, not just for the 40 or so million people of Ukraine, but for the entire European region, because there's a lot of countries right now that are teetering on the brink, including a number of Eastern European countries that we thought had successfully moved over into the democratic European camp, like Hungary and Poland, that seem to somehow be drawn back into this Russian orbit. And I think that I'm not sure we can really do much to help Russia itself at the current moment, but Boris Nemtsov once said, if you want to help Russia, the thing you need to do is to make Ukraine a success. And so that's why we've focused on Ukraine, and that's why we're having this conference, which we hope will actually be the first of an annual series of conferences, so that we can raise the consciousness of people, at least in this part of the United States. We've sometimes heard about Ukraine fatigue in Washington. We in California are not fatigued with Ukraine, at least not yet. So hopefully that will continue. By the way, I've noticed all the Ukrainian visitors are wearing neckties. I'm not, because this is California, and we Californians think that it's very inappropriate to wear a necktie. I actually didn't wear blue jeans, which I probably should have, if I was really going to get into the spirit of Silicon Valley. Okay, good. So, so that's why we're doing it. I think that also our theory of change is that as an educational institution, what we can primarily do is education or training or this sort of thing, which is why we've started these leadership programs and also why we are trying to cultivate these networks of people that have been through our programs so that they can work with each other. That's why we brought so many Ukrainians to Stanford for this conference, because we actually want you to talk to one another, because there's an important agenda. I don't need to tell anybody in this room that this is one of the most unusual political moments for your country, having just had this presidential election. Nobody knows what the outcome of this is going to be, as far as I can tell. I suspect the president himself, the new president-elect, does not know what the future holds. But that's both a danger and an opportunity. It's an opportunity for things to really change. And I think the upcoming parliamentary election is going to be extraordinarily important because of the way that power in Ukraine is constitutionally shared between the president and parliament. And we have a lot of members of parliament here that can contribute to this discussion. Let me just say a few things. I mean, we're going to be talking about the kind of reform agenda that Ukraine is going to face in the coming weeks and months. Let me just talk about 4 issues that I think are really important. This is not going to come to news as to anyone in this room, but they really have to do with 4 things. One is the economy. The second is the nature of the government, the executive branch. The third is the legislature and political parties. And the final one is foreign policy. Since I'm only chairing one panel on national identity, I don't get to participate in these other ones, so I get to tell you my opinions before we start the rest of the conference. On the economy, I think it's pretty clear. One of the things that I think we've discovered in running these programs on Ukraine is that there's a huge number of Ukrainians here in the Bay Area, as there are all over the United States and all over Europe. And in a certain way, why aren't they in Ukraine? They ought to be building companies and doing things and investing and so forth. Some of them are, in fact, doing that. But clearly there's a problem in terms of the business environment in Ukraine, the dominance of oligarchs, of these very well-entrenched interests that create policies that make property rights insecure, that make actually property hard to trade and buy and sell and so forth. And I think, at the core of that issue is the justice system, because if you don't have a modern rule of law, you're not going to have a modern economy. And so that, I think, is something that almost every reformer I've ever talked to in Ukraine puts at the top of the list in terms of things that really need to be done. And so this is where politics intersects with the economy. There's plenty of entrepreneurs, Ukrainian entrepreneurs, and you'll meet a bunch of them later today in the entrepreneurship and technology panel. But a lot of them are here, and they ought to be in Ukraine. And so this, I think, is really an important issue. In terms of the executive branch, I've been working personally with Mr. Saenko. Ukraine needs a modern government. It needs a government with professionally trained, nonpartisan, impartial officials running the government to deliver public services. It should not be a source of personal enrichment working in the bureaucracy. And there's, I think, a lot of straightforward ways in which you can do that. I mean, among other things, you can pay bureaucrats a decent salary so they don't feel like they have to take bribes. But I think in the end, it's not just a matter of money and resources. It's really the training and the professionalism. And until Ukraine has a set of bureaucratic institutions that really are up to the standards of a modern European country, it's not going to be able to accomplish things in other spheres. It's not going to deliver the basic services in health, education, infrastructure that citizens want. and it's not going to provide the governance basis for growing the economy. And so that is obviously a very important agenda item. The third issue has to do with the parliament and the political parties. So I would say, so I'm a comparative political scientist, and what I would say is Ukraine needs political parties. You don't need a bunch of individual, people put there by oligarchs in order to guard the oligarchs' interests. So parliamentary immunity and the removal of parliamentary immunity, it seems to me, is a big priority. But beyond that, what a modern political system needs in its legislature is a set of stable parties that represent clear alternative policy positions so that voters can actually, vote for different types of things. Traditionally, this has been built around, left-right economic issues, but there are other cultural, foreign policy issues that can divide parties. And right now, there really is no clear party system in Ukraine, and I think those of you involved in the Ukrainian parliament need to work on that in the run-up to the parliamentary elections. There really needs to be the emergence of, first of all, unity. I mean, people that think alike, that want a modern, reformed Ukraine have to work together. They can't be split up, among individual leaders and, with rivalries and internal, inability to work. And I would say, having observed these struggles to consolidate democracy in a lot of other countries, for some reason, more modern, liberally minded people don't always know how to cooperate all that well. And I think that this is something that really needs to be, given a lot of thought and needs to be overcome. And hopefully, this conference might be the beginning point for some discussions about how that would happen. The final point is about foreign policy, and I actually think that we're at a very delicate point in US-Ukrainian relations. So some of you may have noticed there was an article in the New York Times this morning about how Rudolph Giuliani is going to travel to Ukraine to try to persuade the Ukrainian government to look into meddling in the American election. This is really bad news. I think that up till this point, Ukraine has sort of flown under the radar, and it hasn't become, at least in the mind of our president, that clear an issue where he thinks that somehow Ukraine affects his own personal interest, which, as far as I can tell, is the only thing he really worries about deep down. But to the extent that he begins to think that Ukraine is a useful tool in his own re-election campaign, that's going to put your country in a terrible position where you essentially have to look towards your own national interests, but because of your dependence on the United States, you obviously have to keep that relationship going. And that's something I think that is going to be, extremely difficult to navigate. Unfortunately, a lot of American foreign policy has been proceeding on autopilot because the administration actually doesn't have the interest or the ability to actually oversee the stuff that's been going on. But as time goes on, that may change. And so I think there are going to be a lot of challenges there. So that's my agenda for things that I think are important, but we're obviously going to have a lot more discussion of all of these issues today. I would like to thank a number of sponsors that have made the Ukrainian Emerging Leaders Program and this conference possible. Those include UNICEF, the Omidyar Network, Thomas Fiala, Rustem Umerov, Slava Vakarchuk. We're really very, very grateful for the support that they've given the UEL program. We've had a number of very helpful conference partners for this particular conference. The International Renaissance Foundation, which helped bring speakers here from Ukraine. Nova Ukraine, which has sponsored our dinner and reception. It's very nice to work with the Atlantic Council. They've been a good partner in Washington in hosting some of our events with Melinda Herring, who will be working with us today. Ben Murphy, thank you for your help in making this CEPR room work. And of course, I'd like to thank our own CDDRL staff, especially Sasha Jason. Sasha, where are you? Back there, who's been in charge of both the UEL program and this conference and a lot of other things. So thanks to all of you. All right, so with that, we had invited Representative Marcy Kaptur. She could not make it, but she does have a video message, and that's what we're going to play now. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Congresswoman Marcy Kaptur from Ohio's 9th Congressional District. First off, please let me extend to you my thanks for attending today's Ukrainian Policy Conference. Your efforts to elevate Ukraine's democratic trajectory among such a distinguished group of experts is a tremendous service to liberty. I would also like to thank Dr. Francis Fukuyama, along with Stanford University's Center on Democracy Development and Rule of Law, for extending the opportunity to address you today. I am honored to represent a district that is home to thousands of Americans of Ukrainian heritage, as well as the world-renowned Ukrainian Museum and Archives in Cleveland. It is also a great honor to serve as a co-chair of the bipartisan Congressional Ukrainian Caucus. We fight tirelessly to improve U.S.-Ukraine relations and strengthen Ukraine's developing democracy against Russian aggression. I, like all of you, know that what happens there to liberty matters here. I remember my first visit to Soviet-occupied Ukraine. It was in 1973, on a rigorous trip to discover our maternal family's history in a tiny town called Burtyn. I remember clearly the grim circumstances caused by Soviet occupation that truly stifled the human spirit. I have never forgotten the hospitality and courage of the people who hosted us and gave light to the hidden layers of political turmoil that shaped our family's history. Indeed, Ukrainians have suffered for centuries under Russian oppression. They have endured events as terrible as the Holodomor genocide famine, which left millions of innocent people dead. Tragically, Russia's oppressive behavior continues to this day. Russia, once thought to be on a democratic trajectory of its own, seeks to undermine democratic institutions not only in its own country, but around the world, including here in the United States and surely in Ukraine. Through cyber attacks, disinformation campaigns, and a bloody war, Putin has sought to destabilize Ukraine's democracy and reimpose Russia's tyranny in the region. Following Ukraine's democratic reawakening in the 2014 Revolution of Dignity, Russia illegally invaded and occupied Crimea as well as the Donbas region. Tragically, Russia's illegal war on a sovereign state has led to the deaths of over 13,000 innocent people and the displacement of millions more. This is not a frozen conflict. Shots are fired daily. Ukrainian soldiers continue to make the ultimate sacrifice to protect their homeland. Mere months ago, Russian naval forces, unprovoked, fired on Ukrainian vessels in the Kerch Strait and continue to illegally detain 24 Ukrainian sailors and their vessels. Despite this, the Ukrainian spirit perseveres. On April 21st, the Ukrainian people made their democratic values known in an election that international observers lauded as free and fair. Such an achievement is a true testament to the Ukrainian people's resilience and love of liberty, all while fending off Russia's ongoing aggression. I am grateful to President Poroshenko for his leadership over the past 5 years and his dedication to moving Ukraine forward. I also congratulate President-elect Volodymyr Zelensky on his election. As the President-elect is a political newcomer, the United States and our allies must all now step up our engagement with Ukraine's leadership, its public and private institutions, and its citizenry. We must make clear our expectations that Ukraine continue to tackle corruption. Reform is desperately needed in Ukraine's judicial system, defense industry, and energy sectors. We should also raise the costs through increased sanctions on Russian banks and Nord Stream 2 pipeline interests. We must close the loopholes that let Russian oligarchs evade sanctions. Oligarchs routinely move their assets between family members and close friends to avoid sanctions. Applying sanctions on the family members of Kremlin cronies already under U.S. sanctions is a common-sense measure to help to drive the Russians out of Ukraine. As distinguished members of academia, the foreign policy community, and former senior government officials, you all play a crucial role in these efforts. There is much work to be done. The free world must step up to provide moral and material aid to support Ukraine's continued democratic trajectory. Let us work onward together for a free Ukraine. Thank you.
Invite the first panel to go onto the stage.
Let's go ahead and get started. I'm Steven Pifer. I'm a William Perry Fellow here at the Center for International Security and Cooperation at Stanford. And I'm delighted that the Center for Democracy, Development, and Rule of Law invited me to take part in this conference today. We're going to start the first panel talking about reforms in Ukraine. And I'll just make a couple of observations. First of all, in the 5 years since the Maidan revolution concluded, you've seen a lot of change in Ukraine. Including things that had not been accomplished in the previous 22 years, from 1991 when Ukraine regained independence up until 2013. And certainly things that when I served in Ukraine at the end of the 1990s, we didn't dream about. So there's been a lot of change, and that's important for Ukraine, that's good for Ukraine. And I'd also say from my time in the US government, when we worked on Ukraine, reform was always a big issue. And it was important to the American vision for Ukraine, which I think we formed first in the early 1990s, but was really adopted by every succeeding administration, which was to see Ukraine develop as a stable, independent, democratic state with a robust market economy. And so these reforms, to the extent that they contribute to that kind of Ukraine, that's something that I think is welcomed by the US government. But while we have seen lots of positive change in the last 5 years, my guess is that we probably haven't seen as much change as many in Ukraine would have hoped for back in 2014. And so there have been some gaps. Frank mentioned a couple of them, the question of the role of the oligarchs, insufficient progress on issues like coming to terms with corruption. And these issues probably played a role in April 21 in the Ukrainian presidential election when Mr. Zelensky defeated the incumbent Petro Poroshenko. What I want this panel to do really is address three questions. First of all, what has been achieved in the last 5 years? What are the real accomplishments that have happened since February of 2014? The second question is, where are the gaps? What did not happen? What didn't get done? And then third, what's on the to-do list looking out over, say, the next 12 to 24 months to really sort of push Ukraine forward? And I am delighted that we have a great panel of Ukrainians here to talk to us about that. I'm going to do just a very brief introduction. Our first panelist will be Minister Oleksandra Saenko, who has had a series of senior and important positions in the Ukrainian government, but since 2016, he's been minister in the cabinet of ministers. And for Americans in the conference, I should briefly explain the executive branch in Ukraine is a little bit different than ours. is the president appoints the foreign minister, the defense minister, and some security portfolios, but it is the prime minister who appoints the bulk of the ministers, including the minister for the cabinet ministers. Our second speaker is going to be Mustafa Nayem, the corner on this fifth. He originally a journalist. He's been a member of parliament since 2014, but he's also exhibit one in the power of social media. In November of 2013, when the Ukrainian government said it was not going to go forward and sign an association agreement with the European Union, he got on Facebook and said, let's go down and make a little bit of noise about this. And the result of that was the Maidan revolution. Our third speaker is going to be Oleksandra Ustinova on my left here. She is one of our Ukrainian Emerging Leader Programs fellows. She came from the non-governmental sector, where she was at the Anti-Corruption Action Center in Ukraine. And then our fourth speaker is also a Ukrainian Emerging Leader Program fellow, Natalia Mykolska. She previously was the Deputy Minister for Economic Development and Trade. So I'm going to do very short introductions. We'll start off with the minister. Mr. Minister, I guess the first question is to you. And could you talk to us a bit about, what have been the key achievements, the accomplishments as you look back on the last 5 years?
Thank you so much, Steve. I'm also the youngest minister in the cabinet of the Ministry of Ukraine. So for me, it's a great honor to be here in Stanford, one of the most leading research universities in the world. I would like to also thank to the president of the university, to your professor, to Natalia, Sasha, Ivan, for all your team for organizing today's event. It's really a decisive moment in the history of Ukraine, just after 5 years after Maidan, Revolution of Dignity, after annexation of the Crimea, Russian aggression in the east of Ukraine. And just 5 years ago, Ukrainians rose against the increasingly non-democratic regime and fought for freedom, for European democratic values, fought for independence. But that time, there were a lot of opportunities, but we had a lot of challenges in Ukraine. We received the country with empty treasury account, with very weak armed force, with weak economy. There is no capable institutions, capable army which can withstand with all these changes. And first period, we should rely on volunteers, NGOs, external experts, and their input in the reform at that time was crucial. Despite these unprecedented challenges, we were able to achieve macroeconomic stabilization and to become growth. And that was the period of initial implementation of the structural reform and changes in order to increase the quality of life of Ukrainians. Together with civil society, our international partners, we developed a midterm strategic plan which has clear priorities: economic growth, effective governance, social capital development, rule of law and anti-corruption, defense and security sector. So according to this plan, we started a very ambitious agenda of the reform. Fiscal reform, we implemented a new system of the VAT refund, fought against illegal smuggling, shadow economy. We signed the association agreement, and now EU is the main trade partner. And more than 500,000 Ukrainians have benefited from the visa-free regime with EU. We started reform in energy sector. We adopted all necessary law to create the energy market. And now Ukraine bought 0 cubic meter from Russia during the last 3 years. We started a very transparent electronic auction for natural resources, and it helped us to attract foreign investors. We developed our agricultural sector, and Ukraine now in top 5 countries, the biggest export countries to EU. We started healthcare and educational reform. We adopted new standards for elementary school, changed the system of professional education, reformed the primary level of the healthcare, Ukraine now is one of the most transparent countries in the world, because Ukraine now in top 20 countries in the ranks of open data. Property register, land register are fully open online. You can get a lot of services, administrative public services, just using your smartphone. Decentralization. The government transferred power and money to the local communities. And now citizens in the Gromada decide where should be the school, the road, the hospital, and their revenues since 2014 increased 3 times. Together with our European partners, we started a very comprehensive reform of public administration. We built a strong center of government, started to reform the ministries. We built a new institution, sometimes from the scratch. We created new police, new healthcare agency, agency of the education evaluation. We think how to attract new people to the system. Together with our European partner, we started a very interesting project which is called the reform staff position. So we created in the pilot ministries, the general departments, and to propose the competitive salaries for young professionals, and to offer them the very open and transparent competition. So we try to bring new civil servants into the system. To have more time for questions and to conclude, I guess, first, there is a right direction, and we should continue and speed up the reforms. But we fully understand our main challenges: institutional reforms and anti-corruption reforms. The rule of law, capable institution, fair justice, free, strong press, and civil society are crucial for us. The second, in order to be successful in all these reforms, we should be more effective in communication with the society. We should learn how to build coalition, how to engage people, how to engage civil society. Because we should rely now, we should rely to engage them not only in preparing, but also in implementation this decision. And third one, we should rely on the responsible leadership. Today, there is a lot of young professionals, both in government and private sector. So it's very important to give them opportunity, to give them more space, to engage them in all these reforms. And in this regard, this role of the Center of Democracy and your personal professor, it's very crucial for us. And let me once more express my sincere gratitude to you and to the Center of the Democracy, because the challenge how to support young leaders, how to develop, how to build network between them is very crucial and very important in Ukraine. And I guess the parliamentary election in Ukraine is a great chance for pro-reforms team to be empowered, to take responsibilities, and to lead change. Thank you so much.
Oleksandra, thanks very much for that. And I think you've outlined a pretty impressive record of reforms over the last 5 years, and I'd cite in particular decentralization. That's a huge change that back in the 90s was hard to see. And what it does, though, I mean, you've pushed authority down and you've made governance more effective, more efficient, and more accountable. And I think that's important. Good. Okay, well, Mustafa, let me turn to you and say, okay, we've now heard the positive side. Looking at this point in time, what would you say are still some of the gaps, areas where Ukraine needs to devote attention to in terms of accelerating reform? And then how do you see that happening over the next 6 months, looking towards a parliamentary election in the fall, if not sooner?
Thank you very much. First of all, for me, it's a big honor to have this conference and to attend this conference. And for me, Stanford is a very special place. And I see here many people who are familiar to me. And I'm so grateful for everyone who gave me a chance 5 years ago and pushed me to go to politics. And it started here. So I'm very glad to come back here and to share what I've seen inside the system for these 5 years and what we have now. First of all, I will not be negative, and I would not be only negative. I understand that many things which happened in Ukraine last 5 years, It was not only achievement of those people who are running country, but most of all of all country. Those people who forced government and president and parliament to do these issues. And we should be very aware and conscious that many reforms in Ukraine happened not because those people who became president, members of parliament, or government, not because they wanted to do that. It was demand of people. And many things happened after protests, many things happened after scandals, after investigations, and it's very important to understand that, unfortunately, in many issues, the leading role was not on government, not on state, but people of Ukraine. That is very important to understand. What I would say about gaps and what we achieved and what didn't achieve. I agree totally with what said Oleksandra, that government did a lot of things which, when we're talking about public service, when we're talking about fiscal reform, and when we're talking about police reform, by the way, and public procurement, even anti-corruption reforms. What didn't happen these 5 years and what gaps we have? First of all, I think it's about two issues, and I want to stress them. It's law enforcement agencies, it's prosecutor office, it's all investigative bodies, court, it's kind of infrastructure of justice. We still doesn't have justice in Ukraine. That is biggest problem. And it's still chance for radical people in Ukraine to start any kind of movement and protest against that. And it's used by Russians also. It's used by all people who were in previous regime. It's used by all corruptioners and those people who are trying to pretend to say that they are for Maidan and for our values, but at the end we see that they are not. They're just using the same system to enrich themselves. The second issue, which is much more even maybe important, is occupied territories and absence of any kind of strategy toward these territories. And I will stop on these two issues, what I mean. First of all, about law enforcement agencies. The only one agency which is partially reformed, just partly, it is National Police. And it's only about public service, public security block. When we're talking about investigative block, when we're talking about criminal block, it is not still reformed. When we're talking about Prosecutor General Office, unfortunately, during 5 years, we had 5 general prosecutors, and none of them didn't respond to the demand of people. The cases of Maidan are not investigated. And all of 5 prosecutors, they were obstacle for these investigations. The second issue, that during last 5 years, even before creating NABU, unfortunately, Prosecutor General Office was not able to investigate the corruption and crimes of current regime, not previous. For all of them, the crimes of Mr. Yanukovych was like a PR issue, and like it was just tool to promote themselves, but not to investigate what people are doing now. And that is, I think, it's the biggest problem, that in Ukraine, still, prosecutor office used against opponents, against previous regimes, but never about those people who are stealing money now. And when you're talking about General Prosecutor Office now, the last General Prosecutor, Mr. Lutsenko, I would say that is the most terrible Prosecutor General we had. Because of 2 reasons. First of all, he doesn't have any kind of qualification to have this position. And unfortunately, on our eyes, even after Maidan, Parliament was forced to adopt and to change legislation and law to make him Prosecutor General. The second, he is the closest friend of President, which is not bad for President, for him, but it's very bad for country. And we see that he didn't do nothing to investigate someone around President. And the third part why I think Mr. Lutsenko, which is a good guy, and I know him very well, I think he is frank, but he is a politician. And he used Prosecutor General Office for political issues. And the last, I would say, bad evidence of that is that Mr. Lutsenko tried to use United States politics in conflict in Ukraine, in United States between Democrats and Republicans in Ukraine, against Ukraine, and against Ukrainian people. Because his interference in foreign relations, when he used Mr. Giuliani who is lawyer of Mr. Trump, to attack the ambassador of the United States in Ukraine, who actually was for anti-corruption initiatives. That is his own initiative, but I'm sure that he was approved by president. And what we have now, we have big conflict in Ukraine, we have big conflict in the United States, and we have damage for image of Ukraine in all the world. So and when you ask what should be done, the first question to Mr. Zelensky from my side and for all of civil society in Ukraine would be, who will be next Prosecutor General? Even more, I would say, if we will have proper Prosecutor General, Head of Secret Service, and Minister of Interior, I don't care who will be our president. Because if these three guys will work proper, we can have any will with them because they 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 will with them because they
Forming or trying to influence the forming of the potentially relaunched or renewed political parties that would run for the parliament. And I believe that people that are present here from Ukraine, all of them are interested in actually making Ukraine prosperous, more competitive, and very successful economy, not only in Europe, but in the world.
Well, thanks very much. Before I open it up to the floor, let me ask a question to all the panelists. I think, Natalia, your question about the influence of the oligarchs. And certainly I think, Ukraine wants to have strong business people, but also you don't want to have them exercising outsized political influence on the system. And particularly because that can discourage competition, because obviously they're going to work to protect their economic interests. And I remember a conversation maybe 10 or 12 years ago I had with a person who might be qualified as an oligarch who said, I'd like to play by fair rules. I'd like to play by Europe's rules, but I can't do it in Ukraine unless everybody else is playing by the same rules. So how do you, and let me put this question to all four of you, what are the steps that you need to take to really put the oligarchs in the proper place? I'm sorry? Sasha, go ahead.
Well, to put oligarchs in the proper place, we need the rule of law and the law enforcement to be working properly. Because if we have the rule of law in the country and we have the law enforcement that is judiciary functioning properly, independently from any political parties, that means you can set up the rules that everybody's going to play in. And that's why we keep saying that the rule of law, the law enforcement is like the immune system of the state. So unless you don't fix this part, you cannot, it is very difficult to fix the others, because it ends up, as already Mustafa mentioned, that we have some problems in the courts, that any issue ends up, even appointment of a minister can end up in a court. So of course, the rule of law and the law enforcement is the key things, the judiciary, for the oligarchs to play fair inside the country.
Member for Parliament. Okay, I will tell my point of view. I want to agree with my colleague, with Natalia, that Poroshenko did many things which should be respected. But one thing which didn't happen during those 5 years, and me as a member of his team previously, I'm very sorry that the first days when he became a president, and we asked him, I personally talked to him about that, and I can say it now, that the biggest threat from oligarchs is that if you are not playing the one rules for all of them, they will kill you. And that's what happened with him these 5 years. The biggest problem of his was that he didn't have equal approach to all of them. And I agree with Natalia that you said about Russian aggression and economy issues and etc. But unfortunately, the guy who sponsored Mr. Yanukovych and his party of region for 20 years became biggest friend of our president. And this guy was for pro-Russian parties. Here is representative of President Mr. Gerasimov. He will sell it, maybe I saying something wrong, but this guy still is monopolist. This guy is running our anti-monopoly committee. This guy who actually built up on our economy big threat like Rotterdam plus its schema when they're importing coal from occupied territories and saying that he is buying somewhere in Rotterdam. That is the reality. And what I agree with Natalia also about new president, which has the same best friend, Mr. Kolomoisky, and we should say it very vividly and obviously, that this guy, Mr. Kolomoisky, is standing behind him. I know what will happen with my country in the next 5 years more from him than from my president, which is elected now. Mr. Kolomoisky now makes statements about what will be done, what should be done, and what shouldn't be done. And that is the biggest threat for next president. What should be done for these people? First of all, we should name the things how they are. We have oligarchs. The only difference between oligarchs and big business is that they're not influencing politics on a non-transparent way. If they want to finance politicians, it should be done transparent way. If they want to influence our parliament, it should be done by transparent way. And many problems from these oligarchs is media. Now in Ukraine, even for young politicians who are sitting here to develop their own party, to run for parliament, it's impossible without dealing with these people. Because they have monopoly on TV, they have monopoly of delivering information to our audience. So without this transparent way of running media, influencing politics, and influencing president and government also, we will have the same problem next 5 years. It's unavoidable. These people want to earn money. They have this instinct, and they will eat all presidents. Just believe me. It is reality I see as a journalist. For 20 years in Ukraine, we have 5 people. And those 5 people are much more sustainable than all politicians, political parties, presidents, regimes. They're still survived. And the question of me is, who is running country? We or they? And we didn't have president who should say them, look, you are citizens of this country, but you are not Tsar of this country. You are now emperors, and we are not friends. We are just working in one country. I hope that next president, Mr. Zelensky, will be enough transparent and will have enough courage to say the same words to Akhmetov, Pinchuk, Firtash, and Kolomoisky. That would be real. And I asked him to make this blog. We are waiting for some video when Zelensky is sitting with these 5 oligarchs saying about equal rules. Believe me, that will be the other picture, and now the page of our history. This guy is doing show. I'm waiting for this show. Show me oligarchs with the president who are dealing about rules, and then follow these rules. Thank you.
I would again go in terms of the economic growth, try to answer your question. I do believe that judicial reform and what is most important, reform of the work of Ukrainian Antitrust Authority, Anti-Monopoly Committee, will have a tremendous effect on the oligarchization of Ukraine. Antitrust Authority should be regarded as a law enforcement authority. And it should, in Ukraine, it has enough power to influence the monopoly of the number of the oligarchs that we have. And I do believe that if Anti-Monopoly Committee would do its work properly and would follow the rules provided in Ukrainian legislation in terms of defining markets, watching out for potentially not new monopolies to be created, and actually dissolving the existing monopoly, it would have an effect on the oligarchization. The third very important issue, the more successful small and medium-sized businesses we have in the country, the less oligarchs we will have. Because these people, small and mid-sized business that have foreign investments or that are exporting abroad, would play by the international rules. They would bring the international mindset into the country, and they would change the mindset of Ukrainian young people that would also like to play by the rule, to be led by example, and to be player not only on the local market, but to be player on the global market.
If I may, I would like to say that probably I fully agree with previous speakers, but and of course equal rules and system of justice, effective, efficient monopoly policy is very important. But I guess there is one more problem, the problem of our election system and also election culture. When I try to compare the Ukrainian system and for example, American system, in Ukraine, unfortunately, the people, they don't ready to invest in parties. And now it's a good chance, and it's also an opportunity for oligarchs to invest and to have a strong representative in the parliament. So the change the culture and change the process of the election to the parliament when the small and medium businesses, when the people understand that it's much more effective to choose their own representative, to invest in this party, to develop their real parties in Ukraine, it's very crucial for democracy. And once more, I guess it's also the problem of mass media, because if you're speaking about the Ukraine, the main mass media belongs to one of the oligarchs. So the free press and free civil society, social media, it's now very, very important on this transition period. So these two things, the free, strong media and civil society, together with changing the election culture and election process in Ukraine, I guess could help. Thank you.
Okay, well, let me open up the floor to questions. Let me ask that you give a name, identification, and short question, and wait for the microphone, please.
Thank you. My name is Artur Gerasimov. I'm the head of the presidential Petro Poroshenko faction in the Ukrainian Parliament. First of all, Mr. Fukuyama, organizer, thank you very much for inviting me to this event, because it's a very good thing to balance half empty, half full, glass of water. And first of all, what I want to say, I just listened that power in Ukraine did everything only exclusively because of the push from the civil society. No, guys, we did together. And only because civil society and power in Ukraine were together as one team, we did that stuff on so high level. Just one example, very simple example, and many people can smile. But I think Sasha knows. Who was in the core, in the heart of the team who was organizing healthcare reform in Ukraine? Named Berezhenko, do you know? It's a true. The Bloc Petro Poroshenko MPs, it's a true. Government, a lot of ministers from Petro Poroshenko bloc, it's a true. Because without this work together, health reform, believe me, didn't have any chance to happen in Ukraine, any. Because I wasn't also in the heart of these events. Second point, I listened to Mr. Mustafa carefully. And first of all, you told you are sure that Mr. Lutsenko, some international elections were approved by the president. I am sure from the heart of the system. It was not approved by the President Poroshenko, and Mr. Poroshenko immediately released full support to the ambassador of the United States. Just check the facts. And you told that prosecutor office about Yanukovych thinks it's only PR. Just one simple question. $1.5 billion returned money. I think in any country, any prosecutor will be proud of that stuff if it will be returned. And the last but not least, I totally supported anti-corruption infrastructure creation, totally supported, and we did a job together again with civil society, with the huge meetings, with the huge clashing, by the way, because only during these clashes we were able to find the right solution. But now a small question to Mr. Mustafa Nayem. According to the Ukrainian legislation, who is able and who is the only able now to investigate so-called A-status state people corruptional issues? You understand, yeah, what I mean?
Yeah.
Because A-status state people, it means ministers, MPs, etc. Because everybody is waiting big fish in the jail. But who is able and only able in Ukraine to investigate these big fish issues? Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Artem, for your question. But I would start from very sad issues. When you are saying that we are together, did something with civil society, I would ask you, who was jailed from only one who killed our journalists, activists, attacked them? Who is the friend of Mr. Trukhanov who are now killing people in Odessa? It is Mr. Poroshenko. He never said something publicly, that in Odessa we had crime regime, which is supported by pro-Russian groups. And you know that, and I know that. The other guy, Mr. Kernes, in Kharkiv, who is the best friend of Mr. Kernes, who during Maidan supported Berkut against us, and against Poroshenko also. This is Mr. Poroshenko again. Do we have any kind of investigation that many people in Ukraine are under attack of local authorities, law enforcement agencies, just because they're protesting and fighting corruption? That's true. That's the reality we have. Who signed the law which forced activists to declare their incomes and assets? It looks like Mr. Poroshenko. I know Poroshenko many years. He's a very good guy. I understand that sometimes he was forced to do that. And that's why he lost this election. Because during 5 years, people who around him proposed him to, to attack activists, to force them declare their incomes, revenge, Mr. Pashinsky, Narodny Front, other people in our fraction, who asked Mr. Poroshenko, do something with these activists. And after that, Mr. Lutsenko told that the biggest enemy of our government and reform are journalists, media, and United States. That's the reality. And this is the same pattern we had during Yanukovych presidency. And answering your question, who is investigating these issues? It's done by Anti-Corruption Bureau. But is there some lawyers here that understand the investigation is done by supervision of prosecutors? And the prosecutor office is running by Mr. Lutsenko and Holodnitsky. And Holodnitsky, who is accused on selling cases, cooperating with corruptioners, is still there. I'm sure that Poroshenko had power, at least publicly, say his position on what's going on in anti-corruption prosecutor. We didn't have it. And courts, you know that the only small shares of cases of Anti-Corruption Bureau are passed through courts. The courts who are controlled by Mr. Poroshenko and his office. We know that. So, of course, we can talk to each other saying who is guilty or who is not guilty. The achievement, and I agree with you, that many things was done. Many things was done together. But don't please undermine the role of civil society. And don't please attack them now, because I'm sure that for next presidency, for Mr. Zelensky, civil society and media would be the biggest problem. Believe me, I know these people. They will not go out from Ukraine. They will attack him also. They will investigate him. And this is what we achieved for the last 5 years, that we have on TV shows investigations of corruption. That the journalists in Ukraine, they could cover President, Minister of Interior, Prime Minister, everyone. 5 years ago, during Yanukovych's presidency, when I just named his building, Mezhigorye, his house, I was banned from all TV channels. Now it is open, and we can say that this is achievement of Ukrainian society for 5 years. Thank you.
Michael McFall, Stanford. Thank you all for being here. First, I just want to say as a comment that we have 2 MPs having this exchange is a sign of the health of Ukrainian democracy, by the way. That doesn't happen in other parts of the country. So I want to get a question about how will we know if the reforms you all talked about, what will be the indicators that the President-elect Zelensky would be going on that path, okay? And let me elaborate on that. And then I want to ask what the West, and in particular what the Trump administration should do to help support that. But here's the paradox. You guys can argue all you want about whether Poroshenko did or did not do what he did, but because you live in a democracy, the Ukrainians voted, and guess what? He didn't win the last election. So whatever he did in those last 5 years was not convincing enough to the majority of Ukrainians that it was successful. And I want to know more about Mr. Zelensky. I don't know him. I know everybody else, but I don't know him. I would think that as coming in as president, the first thing he should be thinking about now is what will he do to succeed so that when he comes before the voters again, that he will not face Mr. Poroshenko's fate. right? So that would seem pretty logical that you don't want to just repeat what Mr. Poroshenko did. Nobody said anything here today, however, to convince me of that. What you said about the prosecutor general and his relationship, that makes me nervous. I haven't seen that video with him with the you only mentioned 4 oligarchs, by the way, you left out 1. But I haven't seen that video today, so what would be the indicators, even concrete names of like, if he named this person to be prosecutor general, that would signal that he's doing the right thing. His relationship with Mr. Kolomoisky, what should he do to show that he is his own guy? And I want to remind you of a negative case. It's a very negative case. But there was this obscure Russian guy who, out of the blue, became president of Russia back in 2000. He was picked by Mr. Berezovsky. He was supported by Mr. Gusinski and Mr. Khodorkovsky completely, and they controlled all the media. After he was elected, he had an electoral mandate, and suddenly the relationship changed rather radically. Now, I'm not advocating that for Ukraine, I want to be clear, but I don't understand, after you've won a massive electoral mandate, why some Mr. Kolomoisky should be controlling you for the next 5 years. Help me understand why that should be true in Ukraine today. I understand why it could be true before. I'm ignorant. I don't understand how an oligarch could have so much control over somebody with that kind of electoral mandate. The second thing, very concretely, what should the Trump administration do to support the kinds of reforms that you just talked about? We are an actor in this, presumably. It could be symbolically, Mr. Pompeo should stop in Kiev on his way to Sochi, or it can be something much more concrete.
Okay. Very shortly about Trump, first of all. With respect to President of the United States, I can't say what he should do, but what I'm afraid of, I will tell that. Now we understand that Ukraine became a part of United States policymaking. Unfortunately, we didn't want to do that. It was not our goal to interfere some election in Ukraine, in United States. And what we see now is that something was done by previous ambassador and previous administration. And all initiatives which was supported by Maria Ivanovich was very transparent way. It was not only anti-corruption. It's just, it's a very ridiculous issue when we say that United States supports anti-corruption reforms. It's true, but it is also about national police, it's about National Guard, it's about economy agencies, it's tax reform, etc. And what I'm afraid of, because of changing of his ambassador, they can change the focus, and we will have that everything which was done on before administration of previous ambassador will be undermined. What it means for us, it means that all these initiatives like Anti-Corruption Bureau, protecting journalists, protecting reforms, achievements for 5 years, they'll be attacked. And when my colleague, Mr. Gerasimov, says that Poroshenko didn't approve the initiative of Mr. Lutsenko to attack ambassador, it's very sad for president, which cannot stop his prosecutor general from interfering in international policy. And I know now what happened actually. Mr. Lutsenko came here, met the lawyer of Mr. Trump, and told him that, look, Ambassador of the United States in Ukraine somehow tried to influence an investigation against Trump. First of all, it's absurd. The second, even if that's true, how it should influence Ukrainian policymaking. It's my country. I want to make reform in our country, and we need support of Mr. Trump and administration. The second issue which we actually expecting for Mr. Trump, be very straightforward on sanctions against our common enemies and opponents. I hope that we will not have the same picture we have in Europe when there are discussions to lift sanctions or not to lift sanctions, to put sanctions on Nord Stream 2 or not to put the sanctions. We need very straightforward and clear message that with the changing of ambassador, with the changing of president, we will not change our strategy toward Russia and what they're doing in our territory. We need this message that be very clear for our European partners and international partners, and especially inside Ukraine, for those political parties who are now trying to shift our geopolicy with the new president. And about Zelensky, what should be done, and why I think that he can be influenced by Mr. Kolomoisky. You know, somehow, when someone became president, we think that he became some magic man, you know? And he knows something we don't know, or he will do something that we cannot. But imagine that you, specifically you, will be president. Just imagine now that you have to appoint, during 1 month, more than 1,000 people on key points in our country, which is Secret Service, prosecutor office, governors, deputy governors, head of all agencies, all enforcement agencies on the local level, and prosecutor and Secret Service on the local level. It's more than 1,000 people. You never know, and you didn't have any kind of experience what is going on inside machine. You don't know these people, you don't know his names, you don't know their interests, you don't know even who's partner. But Ukrainian business and politics is very mixed, so vested interest is something very regular. And now you should appoint someone. For example, I don't know, governor of some oblast, or prosecutor general. You should find this guy, yes? What you can do, you ask those people who you know. He will not ask you or me. He will ask his friends, he will ask his circle, very close circle, and of course, there will be another way when someone will propose him. So now Mr. Zelensky coming to his table, his cabinet, and he will see these propositions from different people, and he will see, and he knows his own proposition. And then he's trying the discussion. And he would ask, do you know this guy? And I will say, yeah, he's a good guy. Appoint him. He's a very good guy. We know him. He will say, can I trust you? Yes, of course, you should do it. And he will appoint, for example, prosecutor general or some governor or head of Secret Service. In 1 month, journalist Natalia Mykolska will discover that he is crooked and corrupt. What should he do? Someone will come him and say, look, this guy is corrupt. And he would say, what do you say? And he will find who advised him. And he will find those people who are around. What they will say him, don't trust. Journalists are lying. This guy is good. You should leave him. And that will be crucial and decisive moment for him. What should he do? Fire him or save him? If he will fire him, he will have direct conflict with those people. If he will save him, we will have the same rates which has Mr. Poroshenko in 5 years. Because it's the same pattern. And why I think that it could be Mr. Kolomoisky? Because the only one guy who is around him, who knows everything about country, he knows everything about system, about people, about economy, about law enforcement agencies, and he has his own interests, is Mr. Kolomoisky. I cannot say that it is something unavoidable or is that we definitely know. But the lawyer of Mr. Kolomoisky, Mr. Bogdan, respectful lawyer, but he works as a main advisor of Mr. Zelensky. Just imagine 5 years ago, 3 years ago, we made representation of private bank and we paid for that $5 billion. And Mr. Kolomoisky sued country. And his lawyer on this process is Mr. Bogdan. So this guy is protecting interests of Mr. Kolomoisky against country. At the same time, this guy coming to our head of parliament with the president-elect to discuss the date of inauguration. I think it's a little bit weird. We are scared about that. Again, I'm not saying that he's a bad president. We don't know who is he. I'm not saying that he's crooked and corrupt. What we are saying that please name us your prosecutor general, head of Secret Service, governor, and chief of staff. That would be very bright sign that, of course, I had some business with Kolomoisky, but I would never agree to what he asked me.
Coming back to your question about the Trump administration, I would say continue financial and military support, but with conditionalities. We need conditionalities to help inside to push the reforms, but we do need the strong support, and this has to be clear for Ukraine right now, because we can see that the United States is the biggest supporter right now, and we can not stand it on our own. And the second thing is people. After Trump came to power, we did not have any strong appointments in the administration who would work directly with Ukraine. We used to have Nuland, we had Biden, so we had people who would look directly at Ukraine and would be our biggest supporters on the Hill. We don't have anybody now, and these people hadn't been there for a long time, unfortunately.
We just said that.
Well, he is for Donbass. It's different. I'm talking about the administrations.
If I may add up a few things related to economic growth, I believe that the best thing US could do for Ukraine now in terms of the economic growth, it's open its market for us, which is probably, probability of that happening is like very low. Just to give you an example, Ukraine is now under the steel tariff sanctions, together with China, who is the biggest supplier, EU, your neighbors here in America. But for US, Ukrainian supplies are less than 3%. But for Ukraine, US is a major and traditionally big market. All the steel factories in Ukraine are situated in the east, very close to the war zone. The second issue, we have anti-dumping duties being enforced, actually supported both by Democratic and Republican administration for 25 years. Ukraine is market economy, and nobody has ever reconsidered actually application of this anti-dumping duties that hurts Ukrainian export. Very important issue is to provide mechanisms for supporting US investments into Ukraine. I believe that OPIC, the US corporation supporting foreign investment, should be more active in Ukraine and should work more with US investors that potentially looking into expanding to foreign market. And the third very important issue for me is to increase support in terms of the technical assistance for developing of small and mid-sized business and technologies and innovation and opening new markets. On the geopolitical level, I believe that we need more sanctions against Russia and more stronger position on Nord Stream 2.
Actually, let me step out of the moderator's role for just a second and talk about the Trump administration's approach. Two comments. First of all, the withdrawal of Ambassador Yovanovitch is wrong. It's a mistake, and potentially it's going to undercut the authority of American ambassadors around the world. But the second point, and this is, I think, for Ukrainians, is my expectation is that the next ambassador, whoever he or she may be, is going to continue to be an advocate for reform and anti-corruption steps, because that's really solidified within the U.S. bureaucracy as it looks at Ukraine. I mean, the U.S. vision for Ukraine can't succeed unless you have somebody coming in and taking the same line that Ambassador Yovanovitch has taken. And the last point I would make is that if you have an ambassador come in who does not carry out that line, there are a number of people, including a number of Americans in this room, who are going to be speaking out very loudly about it. So that's all I have to say. I'll now send back to the moderator and recognize the next question right here in the center, please.
My name is Victor Dohan. I am Deputy Minister of Infrastructure of Ukraine. Short question, 4 answers. Imagine you are in the top 5 list of the new party for the October elections. Who would you name as the leader, as the number 1 of your party? Thank you. 4 names for 4 questions.
For me? Number 1 in my party?
Yeah, of course.
It's too difficult to answer because I'm a current member of the government, so. So we won't tell anyone. Yes. No, I am personally, it's not a secret that I am a member of the Prime Minister's team, so probably as a Prime Minister, I believe in him in this situation, and I guess he will be able, yes, to put the reforms forward. So my name is the current Prime Minister Groisman.
What I've learned at Stanford is that political parties are not always about names. And I truly believe that, Ukrainians are so good in terms of uniting against something. We united against Yanukovych regime. We unite about, like against a threat from Russia, but we are not so good, or we're still learning. I'm very positive about that. In terms of uniting for something, for me, the name is not of the biggest importance. For me, it's important that this political party has in top 10 issues on its agenda economic growth.
Sure. Again, I cannot name you the person who would be leading it, but for me it's more important who would be in the 20s and in the 10s who are going to pass, because sometimes you have a leader, and like Ukraine is always about these leader parties, and you see people jumping from one party to another. So it's not about the leader, it's about the core team who is going to be running. So for me, that's going to be the most important.
I would say, and sort of very clear, I think that the name of leader of my party will be we. I mean, those people who are here sitting, especially in this panel also, because last 5 years, what happened, when we entered parliament, we didn't have any kind of experience to building up teams. And always, people asked us, are you going with, and then several names? Or who is your leader, and then several names? I want to see the party in which will be names of those people who I was fighting last 12 years as a journalist, activist, and politician. It's young politicians in parliament, outside parliament. It's люди важливі, it's однодумці, it's Sila людей, it's our Diznami, it's other many young people around the country who doesn't have enough resources, and unfortunately sometimes doesn't have enough courage to say that we are those people and we are those party which can run country. And I really deeply believe that this parliament election would change it. Because definitely we understand that the names we are saying before, they betrayed us. Some of them are not so courage. Some of them are not so clear. So I hope that we will be the party which will fight for the next parliament also. And the special name, I would not say that we have many of them. There are very small amount of people who are exposed. So the one who will say that I am the man who can run party, I will be with him.
I'm the woman or the man.
That's also okay. Unfortunately, we had only one, leader party in Ukraine who is woman, and I'm not with her.
Never too late.
Okay.
I think we have time for one more last question. Right here in the center.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Naz. I'm an undergraduate here. So I have a question actually related to the topic of teams. What is your interpretation of Zelensky, including former ministers who've contributed to positive changes under the previous regime on his team? Do you think that's kind of a counter signal to potential oligarch influences, or do you think it's merely just symbolic? Thank you.
Yeah, I think that I would be the first one to comment, because I worked with both Aivaras Abramovičius and Oleksandr Daniluk. Aivaras was the one that brought me into the government. I do believe that both Oleksandr Daniluk and Aivaras Abramovičius, they have liberal values. They would support economic growth. The biggest question I have, and actually we invited them here, unfortunately they were not able to come. The biggest question that I have is how influential they are within Mr. Zelensky team. And I would also, again, support Mustafa on that the first appointments that we would see would show us who are the people that are influencing policies at Mr. Zelensky. Because what we see now, we follow him a lot, all of us on Twitter, Facebook. That's the way how he communicates, which I am, fine with, at least for now. But on some issues, he is very decisive. For example, Russian aggression. On some issues, we only hear his advisors talking, or the people that claim to be members of his team talking, but we've never heard him talking. And we still do not understand the hierarchy in the team. and the lead people for major issues.
I think it's very clear. We don't know what is that. It's like in movie, you know, sometimes we see that above the city you see some UFO. It's very beautiful, it's very bright, and it's big, because 73% is big. But you don't know where is entrance, what is going on inside, and sometimes someone from inside says something, which is very beautiful, because I like his statement against Russia, I like his statements against corruptioneers and even against Prosecutor General, but we don't know what is inside. So it looks like, and the problem is that now everyone gets used, that he's keeping silence, he's hanging, but it will definitely finish after inauguration. We are waiting, really waiting. Many people want to work with him. We don't know to whom to talk even. That's the problem.
I just don't have time for one last question. Up in the front. Oh, if you, wait, wait.
Hello, Katya Smagli, the McCain Institute Next Generation Leaders Program. I have a question to Mustafa, a former employee of the US Embassy in Ukraine. You just mentioned that we don't know what is on the inside, but your best friend, Sergei Lechenko, seemed to be on the inside. Did he share any inside information with you?
Sergei really is my friend. That's true. I passed with him many years of being journalist, and I'm proud that he's my friend. But unfortunately, we have different point of view on what's going on in Ukraine now. And we are different approach to President-elect. What I hope that the people like Sergei, like Daniluk, like Ivaras, really will influence next president. Because I know that these people have values, and they are able to do that. But my experience showed that sometimes bright people are used by many politicians to make their brutal issues. I hope that we have different situation. It will be obvious in some days, I think. And regarding deepness of information about Mr. Zelensky, imagine this guy was running for president 5 months ago. We are sitting in Stanford. Here, politicians, diplomats, journalists, members of parliament, and all of us don't know nothing. So it is scary a little bit, yes? But this is something that showed us that maybe there is nothing. Maybe there is no strategies, no plans, no team, and it's even more scary. So I hope that now it is maybe a very secret room in which, developed everything, all strategies, who should be appointed, our future and plan. And immediately after inauguration, we will have this gift to our nation. But for this moment, unfortunately, this is, we are just waiting. That's it.
Okay, let me pose one last question keying off that, because I think 3 of you have now said that a key indicator of where President Zelensky is going to go be his first appointments. Would I be correct in assuming then, say within like 2 to 3 weeks after he's inaugurated, we're going to have the answer? Yes or no? Yeah. No, we'll start with Mustafa.
So the first thing is who's going to be appointed. The second thing is what Mustafa was talking about previously. Even if we see that person who's being appointed is honored, trustable, but he ends up in a month or 2 in a scandal, whether these people are going to be fired. So this is the critical thing. But I would say that having nothing there might be a good sign too, because it would be more scary if he came out the first day and say, I'm going to keep Lutsenko, this is my new general prosecutor. So I would say we need to wait. We have to see, and yes, the appointment and the first anti-corruption scandals would be the key for us.
So, if I guess that's no decision is also the decision, because so after the inauguration process we will see the first steps of the new elected president, and after that we can make some conclusions concerning his first step. So we'll see. So I guess should wait till till the end of this month.
I think that first appointments are important, but they are not decisive in terms of my attitude towards President-elect Zelensky. But I cannot agree that we should wait. We cannot wait. Russia is standing very close to Ukraine. No, I'm saying that all of us should try to influence the forming of the strategy document in one or the other way, using our network of contacts, using our outreach to them. And the most important, West should not wait. US shouldn't wait. EU shouldn't wait. And the more high-level visits and talk with President-elect Zelensky we have, and I believe it's not about Secretary Pompeo going to Ukraine, potentially Vice President Pence. I don't know how feasible it is, but we need to have a high-level representation coming to Ukraine and talking to Zelensky as much as possible in order to influence the strategies that he's working on or his team is working on. Because he is a very ambitious guy, and he's young and ambitious.
Last word.
First of all, of course we had different point of view on Zelensky and different political agenda during election. Now election finished, and we have President of Ukraine in its Mr. Zelensky. With respect to him and my country, and my previous president, Mr. Poroshenko, who actually peacefully transmitted power, and it is our achievement also. I would say that many people of Ukraine are ready to work with new president and his administration. Because it's not about him, it's not about name, it's not about Kolomoisky, it's about our country, and it's about our future. At least many of us who are sitting here, we spent 5 years after Maidan. We never believed that someone will be, somehow will be involved in processes inside system before Maidan, but we did it. And I don't want to lose these 5 years, so we should proceed this agenda. And I do my best to help, to encourage, and maybe to force new administration to do this agenda and to fulfill it. So I would ask him, first of all, about Prosecutor General. That is crucial point for everything, for economy, for army, for procurements, for police, for NABU, for everyone. Prosecutor General is crucial point, and I'm waiting for him. And this guy should be appointed for 6 years. The second, it's Secret Service, which is about frontline, and it's his responsibility, and we are waiting that all these agencies will not interfere business anymore. They will not have economic departments in police, in prosecutor office, and in SBU. These two issues are very important. If he would do this proper way, what I mean proper, it's not my friend should be appointed there, but we should understand who is that guy, what is his values, and what his background. If it would be done, me personally, I'm agree to work with his administration to help. I'm not ready to take responsibility on what is going on inside his team, but I'm ready to take responsibility for my work, for my job in parliament, occupied territories, law enforcement agencies, or something else. And I think all of us here, sitting here, we are all about that. We are not fighting with the president. We are fighting for future of our country, and unfortunately now we have fight with Russia. This is our framework and red lines.
Well, please join me in thanking the panel. It's a great start. Thanks very much. That was great.